All right, so welcome to the Conversation Café. It's a program by the Multi-Faith and Spirituality Center at Concordia University. Welcome if you're here in person or whether you're going to watch this later on online through our YouTube channel. And as we start, I want to start with just acknowledging where we are. So as many know, Concordia University is located in Montreal on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganyangehaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the land and waters in which Concordia is located. And Montreal is also known, or is originally known as Tiohtià:ke, and is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it's home to a diverse community of Indigenous and other peoples. And we respect and want to learn from the continued connections with the past, present, and future. And we really want to strengthen the ongoing relationships between Indigenous and many other peoples in Montreal. And whenever I'm mindful of the land we're on, and I also want to say that it's not just about the land, and it's not just a rote statement we make, but it is really about relationship building. And that's also what the cafes is about. So I know not everybody here is in Tiohtià:ke. I know our guest is further afield. I don't know if you know where you are, Carlo, on which territory. Why don't you tell us where you are? Because the rest of us,
I'm in Morrissey, which I guess it would be Yamashish. I don't know exactly what I can Google it, but I don't know.
And
I don't know.
Totally sprung that on you.
You totally did. It's okay.
I totally did. So it's a great practice to actually think about whose land it is, or who the custodians of the land is where we're on. And then also just remember that it is about building relationships and being respectful. So Cree. Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
No problem. It's funny because what's really polarizing about being in Quebec is that the city that you're in, it's either Catholicism or First Nations, like the names of like everything. It's kind of that's very polarizing. That's what I can say.
So that's a whole other Conversation Café today. So the Conversation Cafés, but you are getting a thumbs up from Mark. The Conversation Café are a chance to engage with guests about a topic around human growth and spirituality, and in the widest sense of that word. So we gather to have a conversation, to be respectful of one another, to learn. There's no test at the end. We don't have to convince each other of anything. We just learn and listen. And today I'm really thrilled to welcome Carlo Proto. Carlo is a filmmaker, and that's why we invited him. But I invited him, but I'm super excited because Carlo is also a Concordia grad in film studies from the Mel Hoppenheim School of Cinema, I believe.
I went. I didn't graduate.
Oh, you didn't graduate? Okay.
We can talk about that later if you want.
That's another. So a former student, but he is, more importantly to me, is a former staff at the Multi-Faith and Spirituality Center, because he was our Mother Hubbard chef. And so he fed us body, soul, and mind for 2 years with the most amazing food. And we had like 100 people in that lounge, and it was amazing to come in here on Thursdays and smell your cooking. So and then we kind of lost touch, and so I'm really thrilled to have you, to reconnect with you, because I know I've sort of kept an eye on you, on your projects on Facebook. So I know you've done some really amazing films, and that's what we'd love to hear from you more about, that and the stories and the storytelling as a way, or filmmaking as a way of storytelling. But before we get into that, I'd love to hear from you, Carlo, about what happened once you left Concordia. Where did your journey take us? So we'll start with this question, and then the conversation is open to all. So if you have a question, we're a small group, so you can just speak up, or else if you want to raise your hand. So tell us what happened after you left Concordia.
Yeah, I slowly faded away from Concordia because I was actually just thinking about it this morning, on how the first feature documentary that I made, which was about my family, I actually continued to use my access to some of the editing suites at the EV building on the think it's the 6th floor. So so I mean, a lot of like filmmakers with their first film, they have like a lot of stories in terms of like, you know, like stealing equipment or like, you know, having like false permits and like all this stuff, which I never stole any equipment, but I felt like I definitely bent the truth in terms of me being a student at Concordia. I like they thought that I was a student, so I just paid my fee, which was like $60 a semester, and I was able to use this extraordinary editing facilities, and that's how I edited my first feature film. And so I was there a little bit, you know, a little on and off. I was coming to Concordia a lot, and I always dreamed about having like the setup that they had, you know, at the on the 6th floor in ED building. And now I once I had it, you know, in my home, then I was able to part ways with which I was able to do on my second feature documentary. But yeah, I ended up, because of the Mother Hubbards thing, I was like the Centropole put like the Meals on Wheels. I did like 6 months there. Like there's these like 6 months contract intervals as like the cook. So I was like the head cook there for while I was making my first feature documentary. And then and then continued to work in restaurants and kitchens and kind of like, you know, grinding away and making rent. And then finally, when I was close to the premiere of the doc, when I was able to get funding for it, I worked, I guess you could say, my last traditional job in a kitchen. And then it was close to when the first documentary premiered at RIDM, which is the documentary festival in Montreal. And since then, I haven't had to work in anything but cinema, which was about 17 years ago, 16, 15 years ago. So
Wow.
yeah, it's a hard grind, but now I'm feel very fortunate to be able to do it full time.
So in my little head, I know more about cooking than about filmmaking, but in my head, you sort of do the same. You use ingredients and blend them together and make something beautiful, whether it's beautiful for your tastes or taste buds, or whether it's beautiful for your eyes and your mind and your soul. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit nerdy to say that, but
no, it works. It works.
I often
I often use like the metaphor of like for me, that I think what makes a really good director is that you have, because you're inundated by so many things to try to make this package, this thing, and it's really like going to an incredibly large buffet, and you're just picking out like the right things to put on your plate to essentially like make your meal. And those, a lot of that has to do with ideas, because you get a lot of feedback. Like a big process of filmmaking is showing your cut, your rough cuts, and your different versions of until you get to your final version, and receiving feedback and knowing which notes to listen to and which notes not to listen to, and actually really having like an open mind. And it's everyone, you know, it's seen as a more of a solitary, you know, form of storytelling, but it's very collaborative. It's incredibly collaborative. It definitely feels solitary, because it's you at the end of the day, and your name is the one that's on it. But it's incredibly collaborative. And so, yeah, the ingredients, the different dishes, whatever metaphor you want to use. And maybe your next question is, how do I get my ingredients? Is that your next question?
That could be what I was going to ask you is, what inspired you what drew you to film?
Like what inspires me to what I basically like, the one of the great things that I learned about at Concordia while I was in film school was, you know, and I don't know if someone taught me this or if I learned it by just watching really bad stuff, because people like short films in film schools watching them is probably the most arduous thing you could go through. It's very painful because it's very bad. And one of the reasons why it's very bad is because people are making and telling stories about things that they don't know about, you know, like depreneur robberies, bathtub suicides, like all these really like, you know, melodramatic things, and people try to emulate something that isn't part of their own experience. And so I learned really, really early that, tell what you know, like tell the stories that you know. And so, you know, yeah, I mean, to me, it's just, it's and whatever's in my environment, it's whatever kind of is part of like my own experience and the things that I go through. I don't really, I don't really do things that I don't really understand or know. I'm so sorry, my dog is snoring in the background. She's sleeping right over there, so on the couch behind me. So I don't know if you guys hear that at all, but if you do that, okay, great.
I don't know. Wow.
I do. So so that's kind of like my general like philosophy in terms of like the subjects and the things that I choose to tell, or the stories that I choose to tell.
And so I'd love to talk about some bit more specific. So like the movie you were working on when you were at Concordia still, I remember you, or maybe just as you left, you were working on this project of the family that sings, and they were all blind. So, and then you have Resurrecting Hassan is another one of the trailer that people can watch. We posted that. So how do you actually go about, how did you come up with them? And when you say, talk about things you know about, I mean, I think that's actually a lot of wisdom, not just for filmmaking. But how do you actually know about those things? How do you come up with those the stories or the characters in your films?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really do anything or can't tell any story, me personally, unless I'm emotionally connected or invested into it. So it's kind of like, that's a good question. It's just like, well, what do I know? What do I know about being blind and about being, and having a great voice? Nothing. I have neither one of those things. I'm not blind, nor do I have a great voice. And so but what I do know is I know about being dyslexic. I know about being marginalized as I know about growing up as a first generation Canadian, and I know about having experiencing racism, more specifically my parents as immigrants, and me trying to assimilate, me trying to fit in. And so we live in a sighted world, and I talked about that a lot, when we were promoting like the film, like the sort of this idea that people don't really understand, what it's like to live in a sighted world, and what that actually means, and what it means to be a blind person living in the world. And I think one of my biggest things is that I took the idea of like, I never wanted to feel sorry for these people who were blind, this entire family who were blind, who were focused or obsessed with the idea of resurrecting their son. And here's another idea, right? Something that actually falls into the multi-faith chaplaincy is that, like, who am I to judge what these people believe? Like a lot of people believe a lot of things that seem very radical to another person, but who am I to judge their faith? And so, when this idea of this documentary about this blind family who wants to, who believes that we can regenerate our own organs, and who want to inevitably do the ultimate regeneration and resurrect their son from the dead. And so the journey of theirs, it's about grief, right? So it's more about like trying to find no matter how outrageous the story is trying to find the humanity within that story, and I'll always tie, especially like in this conversation, a lot of the stuff, because like for me, I would say that I had as much education, if not more education, working at the multi-faith chaplaincy as a cook. And then you laugh, but it's true. Like I really, really did. Like a lot of the people that I met there, some people that I still know today, and I'm not as in touch with some of them as I used to, but I learned like an unbelievable amount because I grew up Catholic, right? Like I went to a Catholic school. I never met a First Nations person or a Jewish person until I moved to the city when I was 18. I just didn't interact with them. I lived in a bubble in Mississauga and in the suburbs of Toronto. And I went to the city, and of course I probably crossed paths with these people and I saw them on the street, but I never had like my first girlfriend when I moved to the city. One of my first girlfriends, was Korean Ojibwe. And to me, all these sort of like these sort of like worlds, and that same that same sort of like wonderment and sort of like discovery is I had something really similar when I went to the multi-faith chaplaincy, because I didn't really understand what that even meant, the idea, because to me, I always, there was always this sort of like contentious idea of religions. And so when you were able to kind of be underneath like one roof and sort of share these ideas like over a meal, that kind of like understanding and empathy and it definitely has resonated in how I make my films and how I tell like the stories. Because when a lot of people like, you know, like they would think like, okay, well, doing a documentary on a blind family and filming them, you know, that seems exploitive and you're exploiting these people. But if you actually watch the documentary, and every single person that's seen the documentary, and I never did this on purpose, it's because I just genuinely love them. And when you watch it, even though it's a very intense process watching the documentary, because you're dealing with very real and intense emotions, you can see the love that I have for them and how I capture them, because they're these humans that have like a lot of like challenges and a lot of errors in their character, but there's a lot of like empathy and understanding. And so that's how I deal with all the stories that I tell, and I will continue till I stop.
So I just laugh because I always feel like I need to say, you know, we're not paying you off to say that MFSC is great.
Well, I mean,
because,
you know, I wouldn't have agreed to do this if I didn't really, I'm not, you know, if I didn't believe in the organization. So it's like, you're not paying me to do it, but I mean, it's really valuable. And that's why it's great to even, it's great to even know that it still exists and that it's still actually still going. I think and again, you know, one of the big cons about the COVID times is that it was, I mean, just sitting at a table and breaking bread, you know, with someone, and just the conversations that had like actually like went on, and the total weirdos that would come in, and like beautiful weirdos that would like come in, like really far out, like people that were just like, I remember there was like this one guy who was this like Jewish Rastafari white guy with blonde dreads. And I was just like, what is this? And he was the sweetest guy on earth. And just that to me, I'm like, blind people? Let's do a documentary about that guy. Like that is just like, wow, that's just blowing my mind. Like this sort of like hybrid of like faiths, and you know, like that to me was just like always like really, really, really interesting, and has fed always like how I approach. So no one's paying me. This is all just very genuine.
Thanks, Carlo. That's awesome. I have a million questions, but I also want to know if others, where do you have, you know, observations, questions of Carlo before I just dominate everything.
I do have a question, but it's not regard to the conversation that has happened till now. It's a different thing. So if you know that the trend today is more of reels, like the short videos, or if you see on Instagram, on Facebook, like people are. I can't say that it's like 100% shift from the full movies to the reels, but still it makes a difference. It makes a huge change in people's life.
Sure.
So what do you feel about that? Like, have you ever thought of, you know, like instead of creating full-fledged videos, have you ever worked on some small projects which has made impact?
Well, I mean, the project that I'm working on right now, I think is going to have a tremendous impact, but again, it's not short. I'm just an old dinosaur now. I'm just, you know, I just really love the idea of the meditative process of storytelling. I like the campfire. I like the unraveling, the pace, the tempo. And yeah, I mean, like I was just, you know, just before this whole call, I was like looking at funny videos, like while I was like waiting, and all that stuff has its place. It's you know, the democratic process of how capturing images and what we're able to do with our phones now is pretty incredible, and I love that. So I have nothing really against it. there's just really a lot of bad content out there. There's just like a lot of like unbelievably bad content out there. And so you just have to be really good at like filtering the stuff. I remember like I mean, but it's not just in like short like film. It's not in just like these like short sort of like videos on like social media. Like the amount of garbage that is on Netflix is just unbelievable. Like it's just so unbelievable. And people, because they just don't want to be doing anything else but staring at an image, they will watch this terrible stuff and they won't have any judgments. They'll just be like, oh, it's just Netflix. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And so there's no like room for criticism or anything like that. And so, yeah, I think like, I don't think, I think it would be challenging for me to do something like that because I just don't like making work. Like I don't like looking at short films, and I don't like doing short length work. I like puzzles. Like for me, it's like the difference between doing like a small puzzle with a lot of pieces or a very large puzzle with a lot of small pieces. And so they're both kind of like complicated, but and in their own way, but the other one takes longer to do. And you know, I'm just that kind of guy that likes to sit, you know, on a Sunday afternoon for hours and hours and pore over this like 10,000 piece puzzle. And I really like doing that. Like right now, the documentary that I'm making now on a basketball player that plays for the Toronto Raptors, for Crave and TSN and RDS, a huge platform. So one of the first time that I've ever gone like from being independent, because I love being independent. I like working on my own. I'm a hermit. I'm that's just like the way that I am. Now I'm working for a corporation, you know, I'm working for Bell Media, you know, like, and so and for a production company, you know, that was hired by Bell Media in order to like make this thing, and who hired me. And so for me, I see this as a huge opportunity because like, you know, like in probably 2 hours of when this thing gets released, more people will watch this documentary that I'm going to make, which is going to be, you know, either 47 minutes or even longer, depending on if there's more funding available, but definitely 47 minutes long, which is an hour, a television hour. More people are going to see that in the first like 2 hours than all the films that I've ever made combined. In all the film festivals, in all the downloads, in all the eyeballs in all the cinemas. Which is extraordinary. That's pretty amazing. And so I'm taking this as serious as anything else that I've ever done, because I know how much of an impact it could have if I do it in a way that is of quality but also of substance.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I asked that question because I wanted to know a perspective from someone who is a professional in this particular industry.
Yeah.
And now we all have the access to the smartphones and everything, like social media, and everyone feels like, okay, we are creating something great, but at the end, there's always a difference, you know, when
but then there's always going to be that, no matter when something becomes, when you go from being a vertical system to a horizontal system, it's always going to do that. You're always going to have this explosion, you know, of content. And so, but what's great is that people, it's kind of like a two-way system. People are learning how to use the device, so they're more critical in certain ways because they understand. They're just like, oh, I could just pick things. I mean, it's obviously a lot more difficult to actually tell a story. And so, because it's just very, very, like, some people who have been doing it for 20 years still don't know how to tell a proper 3-act structure story. Like, it's a really hard thing to do, and it takes a lot of time and effort, and they're just different formats for different things. But what I was going to say was the Nollywood, for example, which is basically like Bollywood, but in Nigeria. I mean, that wouldn't have happened without the digital age. That wouldn't have never happened. That just wouldn't have happened. And here you are, you know, one of the wealthiest and one of the, like, the most important, or not important, but one of the most, like, the country in Africa that has some of the most influence, which is Nigeria, has this industry, you know, that is named after one of the countries that has the biggest population in the world. India is now Nollywood instead of Bollywood. And so now, you know, they have this like tradition of making these bad movies, but I mean, who cares? I mean, it's for them, it's not for me. Like it's like, that's the thing, is that like so some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them are amazing, and some of them aren't great. Like it's just like, it's the you, and that's what happened, you know, like when you have this sort of like with things go from being vertical to being horizontal, which is refreshing. But you know, it makes me feel good because I know, like, you know, the cream rises to the top, you know, like no matter what you, no matter how many of that stuff is there, people will identify quality. They just will. It'll eventually happen. And you know, like I'm working with this basketball player, you know, has an incredible story that I'm so excited to tell, you know, and this guy is 28 years old and he comes from that generation. And I sent him like, you know, like an assembly of some of like the editing, and they were just like blown away. They were just like, I can't even believe that you made this, like that you made this assembly. I'm like, this is just the beginning. Like, just wait until we actually finish this thing. So, you know, people, it's funny because like, you know, people get to, now I feel more than ever, can acknowledge quality. They understand like what is good and what is bad. Where before, you know, there was 3 channels, there was one cinema down the block, and you watched what you were told to watch. But now you can watch whatever you want at any time, and you're just like, I don't like it. All right, here's another 100 channels, you know, that I can watch and that I can go to. So it's become a lot more democratic in that way. Very, totally, completely saturated, but democratic.
Yeah.
And it's
Like
never
like the Canadian political system. So many parties, so many parties, so many choices. But yeah. More
I was just going to
democratic.
say, it's never that simple. It's never good or bad. It could be a really bad quality or poorly done, but you know, there might be a really interesting comment on
For sure.
society on that. So, you know.
Oh, absolutely. Like one of the best things that I ever heard is that like, you definitely can have a horrible fiction film because it's basically pulled out of like the figment of someone's imagination, right? But you can't have, no matter how bad it is, you can't have a horrible documentary because there's a document in there of something that is based on truth. Even if you have like 90 minutes of garbage, you could have like 30 seconds of a shot of a deer eating something, and you'll remember that. You'll remember like that, but you're not going to remember like the terrible fiction film that you saw like whatever, like 10 years ago. But there'll be like that moment that might like stick in your head because it's like sort of like this document. And that's why, I mean, I find why I continue to not only make fictions, but still continue to make documentaries, because even when they're bad, they're still kind of okay. They're kind of good in a way.
And I guess you leave it up to the viewer. I mean, I remember, you know, seeing in college complicated, you know, diagrams about the, you know, the impact on the speaker or the writer, and then what the writer thinks they say and what the speaker or the reader hears. And it's, I mean, it's similar, you know. So if you like, it's there's a part of what I find amazing about the creative process is you put your whole self in, you believe in this, you tell the story, you know, and then you give it out into put it out into the world, and then it almost takes on a life on its own, you know. So
Yeah.
how people receive, you know, so you don't make judgment about, you know, the family who wants to resurrect their son, but you know, it takes off in so many different directions by the viewer. And so it's not the afterlife, but almost a second life or a second phase of the movie.
Completely. It's unbelievably jarring as someone who makes it, because you think that it's this certain thing, and then you put it out into the real world, into people, and then people, you think you've made this like accessible thing, but really you've created this nightmare for people. Like they're just like watching this thing and they just feel traumatized watching it, because you're just like, but because I've been with it, and because because while I was making it, I experienced my own trauma, so my tolerance and my threshold was really high. So I was like making this like really intense thing, and then I put it, I was like, this thing is going to be so accessible and everyone's going to watch it and they're going to be able to digest it. And then I realized, I was like, wow, that is not the case. Like people, you really have to commit to like watching this thing and to go on this journey. But if you can finish it and survive, like it will stay with you. Like that's the biggest feedback that I've sort of like had watching it, is that, you know, these people really stay with you for a really, really, really long time. Like it shakes you up. You in a certain way, you have to be ready almost. And what's amazing about it that I realize is that like spiritually, psychologically, like on so many different like levels, mentally, like if you're not ready to sort of watch certain stories, you're just gonna either reject it or just project your own nonsense, your own like toxicity onto it, and judge it for something that it I don't think it is. So it's really, really wild and incredibly jarring when you put that thing and it takes on its own. I think about it all the time, because really, like, you're making this thing for the audience, and so that's definitely become part of my process. And now, because I'm kind of I'm working through the trauma. I'm trying to make things that are not as like aggressive as before, so that people can actually sort of like digest them. But that's just something that you just don't really realize until it goes into the public, and the sort of feedback you get, you're just like, wow, yeah, maybe that was a bit too heavy-handed, or maybe. And then when looking back on them, I'm just like, I don't even know how I made that thing, because who I am now, because these things generally, I think if a good movie, a good film, from the point of idea to when it's shown, it's generally 3 to 5 years, like, for sure. Like it's unbelievably rare that like someone can make something that has substance in 1 or 2 years. Like it's really, really difficult. Like they'll tell you that, oh, we got greenlit at this time or this time, but if you ask the person when they first thought about the idea, when they first started writing about it, it's usually like at least 3 or 4 years, and sometimes more. I mean, sometimes it's like many, many years.
That's really countercultural, because I mean, when it's interesting you mentioned those little flicks, because often, because often they're like something happened, or it's like yesterday and it's hot today and gone tomorrow. So, there's something about a patience, longevity, sort of the reward. If you sort of think about a documentary, the reward or the final result won't be there for many years. And so that's in our fast-paced world with instant gratification, I would call it countercultural.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of have another question. Kurti has class, but she just says glad to hear the experience and what makes the documentary different from movie stuff. So thanks, she's saying. But I'm curious, Carlo, about how, like, I'm only sort of familiar with Hollywood movies where they have a script writer and, the playwright, the script writer who maybe either takes a play or comes up with something, and a producer takes it and reads it like, oh yeah. But you sort of seem to do everything. And how do you, or how, like that play or the documentary about the basketball player, who actually comes up with the script, or what's the process for documentary? I don't even know what I'm asking.
No, I do. I'm pretty sure I know what you're asking.
Glad you understand.
Well, that's the
me.
question.
Thank you.
That's the question. Who comes up? Like, how does it? So,
yes.
I think it's changing a lot. I think that part of what we talked about before, like, people are learning and I think most people who make content, for the most part, are jack of all trades. So, these people that you were talking about, Meg, that like, that make these ideas, like they're essentially, who's making these like small videos, they're like they're the screenwriter, they're the camera person, they're the editor, and they're like the sound person. Like, they do everything, right? Whether the quality of it is good or bad, the responsibility falls on them. And so for me, I very much, like, very naturally and organically moved in that sort of like direction. And I grew up, like, in the generation of like, nobody is telling our stories. Period. At all. Not at the Canada Council level, not all. Right when I was like growing up, like right when I was in my early 20s, money started going into, the others, Latinos, everybody, like all the, the first generation Canadians, basically people who aren't white. And so I felt like it was my responsibility, that I wasn't going to let anything get in the way of me going to that. I'm not going to sit there, and I'm also an unbelievably impatient person when it comes to, like, I came up with like the ethos, like, of do it yourself. Like, that was an idea that was embedded into me at a very, very young age. Like, if you can't get it, if you can't acquire it, do it yourself. And so all that stuff is just like, is very much like, even for this, even though I'm making this documentary like under like a corporate structure, you know, I'm the camera person, I'm the director, I'm writing it, and I'm also co-editing it. So, you know, I had to fight for those things to a degree. Like, it wasn't just given to me. You know, there was a bit of pushback because people aren't used to that. They're used to the machine and how the machine works, and everyone has their roles and all that stuff. But, you know, I had some people that advocating for me, and really at the end of the day, it makes things easier. It makes things like so much more easier when everything is coming from like one person. I'll go back to the point that I made before. If you're going to take all those things on from the beginning, the writing process, all that stuff, you have to know how to understand. You have to learn how to listen to suggestions. You have to learn how to filter those suggestions and turn them into something that is going to make the story better. And so the process of like starting all that stuff in the beginning, like it's different in terms of like in the structure that you sort of like work at. But you know, the world is filled with thousands and thousands of people with scripts that never get made. And I was not going to be one of those people. I'm just not interested in that. You know, like I have a fiction film that I made with Denis, who was the father in Resurrecting a Son in the film about the blind family, and I've made him an actor who's working with a professional actor who's an established Quebec professional actor, and together they are non-identical twin brothers. And so I'm in the midst of like editing this thing, and yeah, I just wasn't gonna wait for the, you know, it's basically made on a shoestring, but I'm not gonna sit there and wait for, you know, the industry to tell me that I'm ready to be a fiction filmmaker. Like I'm just not interested in that. And so yeah, and living out here like in the country, it's really inspiring because in a lot of ways, like my next door neighbor is like an established like producer and director who's like senior to me, and further down the road is Chloe Lariche, who's like another fantastic, who's working on her second feature film and who's also senior to me. And so, you know, there's all these people who I'm kind of surround myself with who are not going to sit around and wait for someone to tell them that they're allowed to make or tell a story. It's not part of my vocabulary, and it's not part of like my DNA. So I'm a bit unusual in that way, where, you know, there's a traditional model where it's just like, you know, you shop around your script and you get your script sold, and I know, and I have friends that sort of like have gone underneath like that model, but I'm just not patient enough for that, and I just don't, I'm not interested in it.
That boggles my mind, because you're patient enough to make a movie, a documentary that takes 4 years.
Yeah.
You know, and then you say you're not patient. So I guess it's a different kind of patience.
It's a different, yeah. Well, maybe patience isn't the right thing. It might be tolerance. I don't have the tolerance to sit around and wait. I'm very much of like, okay, let's go. When is this going to happen? Like, that's why, I mean, back to the Mother Hubbards thing. That was a zoo. Like, are you kidding me? And by the time I left, I was cooking for 160 people. Like the annex, the area, like where everybody like eats. I mean, you could not step or walk where you were not actually, like, people were on the ground, like all around. Like it felt like we were in a commune or something. It was wild. And I love that chaos. Like, I love that order chaos, like that, like just like, and that's one of the things that I loved about kitchens, is that it was very structured. There was like there was definitely like a focus, but like, you know, between 5 o'clock and 11 o'clock when the kitchen was open, and if it was busy, it was just nuts. And that's filmmaking as well. And I really, I'm not going to sit around and wait for that. And that's what's great also about like having cooking as like your background, because, you know, like, and what's so kind of therapeutic in a way about being able to cook. I mean, everybody should know how to cook, but for me, is that you know, is that you make this thing like within like an hour and a half. Like, you accomplish this thing. It doesn't take you 4 years to do. It's this thing that you do now. But I love the puzzle. I love the journey. I love chipping away at something. I love making something better. Like, I love seeing it evolve. I get excited by it. I get energized by that idea. So to me, it's like, I don't know, patience, tolerance, like what's like the word? But I just have no, I have no, yeah, I guess tolerance is a better word. I have no tolerance to sit around and wait.
I guess so I'm not a filmmaker clearly, but I do resonate with a lot of the things you say, and I think they're great life lessons. And and I mean I think of them in terms of spirituality. So what I hear is to sort of take your dreams and your hopes and find a way to bring them to reality, and like, so don't sit around and like follow your dream basically, which is, I mean, takes a lot of courage and takes, and sometimes there's structural obstacles in people's ways, but your story is really an encouragement in that. But I also, when I hear talk about, not sure if patience is the right word, but it's more about a step by step, and life I feel is very much like that. It's it's like you do one step and you and see where it goes, but you're always active. Like even if you sit and reflect and wonder about how best to, even if you're trying to put the puzzle together, if you will, you still, it's still active, even if it's reflection or planning or then the filming. And so I think to be always on the move and always engaged, that's what I hear. And then one step at a time, like it comes to fruition and it blooms, but it also changes, I mean, for me, that's sort of when we think about our life's journeys, like maybe we have a plan for our time at Concordia, but there's so many beautiful things that happen on the way, and the journey goes totally differently than we expected, and yet at the end of it, we still have accomplished something beautiful. And to me, there's a great life lesson in that.
Well, it's the fermentation process, right? Like it's one of the things that brought me to Quebec. Is the idea is like I came from the city, the biggest city in the country, and the go and the product before process, which is something that I just did not want. Like that was I was preached to, I was converted, and now I'm evangelical about the idea of process before product. And I'm just not interested in outputting something that isn't great. I'm just not interested in that. And I will hold on to this film, the fiction film that I'm working on right now, that I'm editing alongside with this other documentary. I will hold on to this thing and I will not release it until it's good, until I think it's great. I just won't. I'm not. I'll tack up the tens of thousands of hours that I've worked on it to life experience, or a master's. Like it's just not. I'm just not interested in that sort of like idea. And so, but one of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking was that when I was at Concordia, one of the things that I learned about more than anything, is that if you, and earlier before Concordia was like, because I first went to business school, right? Because I came from, a traditional background, and now we know when I was like 18 or 19, you're supposed to have something to fall back on. But what I learned very quickly is that if you have something to fall back on, you will fall back. And if you lean forward constantly, then you have no choice. It's kind of like Francis Ford Coppola, who made The Godfather, talks about the idea of like when he had children, he made his best films, which is true. It's totally true. When he was raising his children, he made his best films, because when he had children, he had this urgency, he had this dependency. These lives depended on him, and so he had to push himself to be the best filmmaker that he possibly could be, because he had no other choice, or else these kids would starve. And so when you put yourself in that sort of like position, you're forced to achieve the thing that you want to achieve. But if you sit there and you're just like, well, like I'll do this, but then I'll have this to like fall back on, and you're kind of just like, and to me, it's like, yeah, you could do that, and that might work for you, but I think you'll have a lot more success if you lean into a lot more of the thing that you talked about before, your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations.
That takes courage, and that takes a certain willingness to go against the stream, because I mean, as you said, you went to business school because that's what you do. And many of us do, what we're, what society deems good, to have a good job, or deems proper, have a good job, have a job with a, benefits, something, get a degree that's valuable, like
Yeah, I mean,
engineering or something, you know, and I'm not bashing engineering, but
no,
that's,
not at all. It's the
but
first thing that came to my head as well when I was thinking about it too.
sorry, Meg, but you know, but so it's to say, you know, I'm not interested in that. I'm going to lean into what I'm passionate about. I mean, that really takes courage. And there's also many ways to do that. You could do that through a job, but you can also do it through your social engagement,
Yeah,
who you hang out with. So, you know, the
yeah,
stories we tell and the stories we hear, I think too.
yeah. And who knows what Meg's gonna do like in 10 years? Because you know, who knows that engineering's a gateway to being like who knows what, you know, like a I don't know. I have no idea. Like the sky's the limit, but you hear a lot of those stories about like, oh yeah, I was once an engineer, I was once this, so I went to like medical school and now I'm like doing like this other thing. But I think if you see all those people that do that, the thing that they have in common for the most part is immigrant parents. And you either have like you have two choices. You can lean into the fear or you can actually use the fear to your advantage. And I saw like my parents, I saw my dad, I saw him start where he actually like did and where he ended up. And I saw him not give into the fear, but like lean into it and actually use it. And I like the tunnel vision that I saw from like my father for the positive and the negative, like that in itself, this thing that you call courage, I mean, I just call it survival and I call it like doing what they did. And I to me, anything else but that is foreign to me. So I don't, you mean people can say amazing things about it and it's fine. And it definitely comes with its like disadvantages and its abuse and all that other crazy stuff. But if you can mind that, if you can make lemonade out of it, then that's I think like the best thing that you could possibly do. But I mean it's uphill and it's a grind. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, I don't know. I'm happy with who I am. So that's all you can really hope for.
Wow. Wow. Okay. I'm stuck on the immigrant parent. I wonder if it's immigrant parents are other ways in which we've been othered, you know, like.
Well, look at you, Ellie. Like you came from Germany, right? Like you're
Yeah,
here.
but I
Like
don't have immigrant parents.
no, but you did come to a new country, right? You
I
know,
did.
and you are part of like a minority. Like you know, you are in a sense like you know like, and so you have that fight. I see it. I know it. I know you. You've got that. You got that kick, and so I think that kick comes from feeling marginalized. You know.
That's it. Well, that, you know, that's an interesting reflection because I hope I haven't lost that kick, but I also feel it's different for me because I'm white.
Yeah.
I mean,
but you are
you
a
know,
woman and you do and you are a lesbian. So, you know.
yeah, that's true. And
so,
and in Quebec more and more, the thing that actually sets me apart is that I'm religious.
yeah.
That's actually
yeah,
a big,
yeah.
that's actually the
Oh my God.
biggest of them all.
I completely forgot about that. Yeah, talk about fighting talk about fighting for like a horse that is not winning right now in the race. But still I love that. Like I mean for me it's like I have like my one of my best friends is a Christian and I mean yeah, I always have respect for the minority like in whatever fight it is whether like I find it at the very least, even if I think it's morally wrong, like not religion, but like, you know, on the extreme of the other thing, I still have like interest in and kind of like curiosity of like, where does that come from? Like where, so like, so, you know, for me, like religion is like it's like a no brainer. Like there's so much beauty in it that it's like, when you're the minority, how can you not respect that? You know, even if I don't identify as an atheist, but even if people do identify as an atheist, there is something pretty extraordinary about that that fight.
Yeah. Okay, Mark, are you? I haven't heard from you. Well, we heard a little bit. Any thoughts, comments, or Meg? I know I love talking to you, Carlo. I mean, I remember sitting in the lounge and we had, or more importantly, in the kitchen. You were cooking up a storm, and I was probably just sitting there because I couldn't keep up with your culinary skills. But we've always had great conversation, and it's
Yeah.
that curiosity, and I think that's what you're trying to express and give voice to your films. And
I'll give you an example. I'm gonna put you on the spot, Ellie. But I'll give you an example of like I swear to you, it's been 17 years since you and I probably had this conversation, and I still think about it. When you corrected me, I used to use the word girls, and you're like, they're not girls, Carlo, they're women. And I'm just like, oh, this is 17 years ago, right? I was 25, right? I'm 42. So it's like, I still think about that. I still like that correction, those things, like like, it's, you don't have to like get into a fight or an argument with someone to like make a point. You can just like, I'm just going to leave this there, and you can just like, like you can choose what you want. In front of me, you don't use the word girls, they're women. Outside of me, you can do whatever you want. But like here, and that stuff sticks with you. It really like stays with you. And to this day, I mean, especially in today's climate, are you kidding me? Like, it, to me, it's like that. I mean, I those things sort of like shape you. So that's why that moment there, those like key sort of like learning moments. I mean, film school, whatever. Like, those are the moments that are like the real moments for me, that I actually feel like I learned something. At the time, I was just like, man, this, like, why is Ellie so angry all the time with me? Like, why is she so upset with me?
Oh my gosh.
But it was, but those conversations that you and I had, like, they were real. Like, it was, you were like my elder. Like, it was a real teaching moment. And I, like, I'm sweating just like thinking about it, but like
Oh
in
my
talking
gosh.
about it, but they were really, really sort of like incredible moments. So yeah, I don't know why I went into that, but I just wanted to sort of put that out there, that it's those sort of like things. It's those moments where you're not relaxed, where you feel like, because I mean, I didn't need to work at the chaplaincy. I didn't have to, like, I could have just been like, who, like, why does this lady give me such a hard time? Like, get me out of here. Like, why do I have to fight about maple syrup all the time with her? Like, get me out of here, right? So
now you're telling stories about, Mom fighting about maple syrup? What did
No, it was like, you were like, Carlo, maple syrup is expensive. Why do you want to use maple syrup so much? And like, you and I actually had like an hour-long conversation about like maple syrup and like why we should be using things that aren't like processed sugars. And it was just like, and these were the things that, I don't know what you took away with that, and maybe you don't even remember it, but those are the things that I like. Those are the things that I lean into. Like, I love being contradicted and proven wrong, even though I'm an incredibly stubborn person. But
well, I tell you what I love about this. I do remember our conversations, it takes, like, and yes, I totally remember the girls. It still bugs me when men are called men and women are called girls.
It bugs me. It bugs me now. I'm converted. You've converted me. Like, when I hear it, I don't correct them, because I'm like, who am I to correct someone? But like, but I'm like, about that. But to me, it's still, I'm like, yeah, I'm like, she's got a point.
But I think what it also takes is, it takes people to really listen, and both of us had to be in a space where we can have that relationship, where we can challenge one another, listen to one another, not always agree, and still have an amazing time, and think about it. And so I'm really glad that happened. It happened for me. I mean, I have fond memories of, I vaguely remember the maple syrup, and
that was just like one example.
I would think about this differently now. We just buy it in bulk. We have some in the fridge in Meg's office, by the way, if you need some. but to me, it's about, so what you do in terms of your work, in terms of the documentaries, is really just engaging with people to sit down and think and have reflective conversations, but to the medium of film and documentary. I think, it happens on a collective level, or you offer it and a whole pile of people watch it, as opposed to you and I sitting in our lounge. And I think that's a gift you offer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dialogue for sure that you have with yourself when you're engaging with it, and then if you want to take it sort of like one step further. But yeah, it's like I'm kind of speechless in really what to say about that, because it's so unbelievably complex, because the so many of the great things that have happened in my life are so wrapped up in so much tragedy. And so it's like, it's hard to kind of like with like one or the other. But The biggest thing that's helped me out in this whole process is and that I'm incredibly evangelical about is therapy. I don't know how anyone could be a filmmaker without a therapist. That to me sounds impossible. Therapists have therapists. They call it like supervisions or something like that. And documentary filmmakers who are in certain ways kind of therapists need to have therapists. Like I don't know how anyone survives like without it. So yeah,
wow, you're just tossing this out now at the very end of our time, but that's
in therapy they call it the doorknob theory. Like you're just kind of like you're just like sessions about it. I was like, oh, by the way, I was thinking about ending my life. Bye, see you later. I'll see you next session. And you're just like so yeah, that wasn't on purpose, but it's definitely like but you know.
Yeah. I'm just going to say often in life it's like this because, you know, often the most profound moments happen actually out of suffering or out of tragic situations. And I mean, before we started the conversation, you and I talked about COVID, and nobody wished for COVID, and yet there are many powerful things coming out of it. Or if I reflect back on my life and some of the tough things, that's where it grew the most. And so, and you really again lean into that through your documentary making. So it's actually a great reminder for all of us that life isn't always amazing or wonderful, and what makes life so wonderful, I would say, is the complexity of it. So
yeah, it's hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
It's always been challenging for me, but like, you know, like my addiction to puzzles, to very long audiovisual orientated puzzles. This is another puzzle that I'm, you know, sometimes, you know, take a break from, but yeah, it's unbelievably like challenging. But yeah, that idea could spin off into 1,000 different conversations.
It could indeed. And I am aware we're at the end of time. We do try to sort of contain our awesome conversations, even though you and I could sit down for like a week and talk. But Mark and Meg, I did ask you earlier, like, do you have anything? And then we got off on that whole other point. So just your mic is off, Mark, if you want to say anything.
I've got a quick one. Oh, sorry, Meg.
Oh, nothing. I just wanted to say that I loved your passion. I loved your, you know, the way of thinking. Like, there's a lot to learn from you, actually. And yeah.
Thanks, Meg. Well, you know, I genuinely would actually love to teach, but the problem is that I didn't finish my undergrad. I'm dyslexic, and there's just no room for me in the academia. So, although if I was in Chile, where ironically enough education is privatized, I would probably have a job teaching somewhere, because they don't actually hire you based on that merit. They hire you based on experience.
Well, I would say never give up, and there are many ways of teaching.
I'm
not a teacher, but you know, and you teach through your film. You teach right now, you know. So there's many ways of doing that. So don't ever give up on that.
No.
But Mark, I'm gonna finally you were gonna say something.
No, that's okay. I'm sorry if I was just sort of lurking the whole time, but I love this idea of image sort of as dialogue. I had some thoughts percolating, but maybe just as we're closing, is there, for you as a filmmaker, I'm always curious, what's the best platform? What is most of benefit for somebody who wants to watch your work or engage with it? What's most helpful for you? Where can we either pay to watch it or participate in it?
I will, you can just email me and I'll send it to you.
Okay, great.
And if anybody watches this, you know, in a year and not related to the MFSC, can you send us some links, or do you have a website that we can direct them
so
to?
my name is Carlo, Carlo, no S, Carlo, at thehandshake.org, O-R-G. You can email me and I'll send you a link.
Amazing.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah, no problem. You were able to watch Resurrecting Hassan in French on Crave for a couple of years, but they recently took it down. the first documentary that I made about my family is out of circulation, like for personal reasons, only because I want to present it in a I only want to show it if I could actually present it in a way where there's an actual dialogue, not someone who, you know, decides to like, you know, like do their accounting while my family is like playing on the screen or something. Like I definitely want it to be curated or presented in a more of a, not in a casual way, to put it lightly. But Resurrecting Hassan, I have a distributor, Film de Trois Mas, M3F, no wait, M3M, F3M, Film de Trois Mas. I don't know how else to say it. But anyways, okay, cool. You could probably like rent it off them or something. They're my like Canadian distributor, but just email me, I'll send you a link.
Okay, grand, thank you.
Yeah. Amazing. So with that generosity, I do want to thank you for your generosity of spirit, of time, your great stories, your thoughtful reflections, and just sharing your sort of, it's really a path that you shared with us, and the approach, which I think for me, I'm not at all a filmmaker, but it certainly is a lot of food for thought for me as always. So I really want to thank you very much for that. And with that, I just want to say that anybody who's watching this, we're having a great event tomorrow, Abraham Jam. All of the info is on our webpage and Facebook and Instagram, and we have another cafe in 2 weeks about the Waste Not Want Not campaign at Concordia and how this all started with Kerolis Riyadh. So it's our next cafe, and I hope to see many of you there.